Welcome to the Kindle Chronicles, the Friday podcast all about your Kindle. I'm Len Edgerly. Today is May 25th, 2018. Welcome from downtown Denver, where Taylor Swift is in concert tonight, and we have house guests from Montana who drove all the way here to take in the show at Sports Authority Field at Mile High. It's going to be a lot quieter tonight on the island of Vinyl Haven off the coast of Maine, where I reached this week's interview guest, Andrew Updegrove, a respected cybersecurity attorney and expert who is also the author of the Frank Adversego series of cyber thrillers. We talked about his novels and a lot of scary topics, big and small.
So to say that Alexa is somehow invulnerable, I think is foolishness.
Also this week, a perfect storm of background noise lures Alexa into a creepy bit of messaging. Amazon and Hachette make nice with an Alexa partnership. And in the tech tip, I will talk about sharing your Fire tablet with someone else in your household. The first news item this week foretells some of the cybersecurity topics that you will hear Andrew Updegrove address in the interview. A family in Portland, Oregon got creeped out when an Alexa device in their home sent a snippet of conversation to a random person. That at least was how the story was reported when it broke yesterday. Amazon said it was looking into it, but the story behind the story did not really surface until today, Friday, May 25th. Here is how CNBC today reported Amazon's explanation of the incident.
Amazon is responding to a family's claim that their Amazon Alexa device recorded their private conversation and sent an audio file of that conversation to a phone contact. We did contact Amazon, and they're saying the following statement. They're saying Echo woke up due to a word in the background conversation sounding like Alexa. Then the subsequent conversation was heard as a send message request, at which point Alexa said out loud, "To whom?" At which point the background conversation was interpreted as a name in the customer's contact list. Alexa then asked out loud, "Contact name, right?" Alexa then interpreted background conversation as right. As unlikely as a string of events is, we are evaluating options to make this case even less likely. So in a nutshell, it was a very long statement, Melissa. They're saying that it was a perfect storm of situations that caused their device to record the private phone conversation, send that audio file to a phone contact. The couple is telling a local television station in Seattle that they contacted Amazon and that the company's engineers have come and addressed the problem and apologized to them for it, and that they are taking measures to make sure it doesn't happen again.
Wired Magazine's Lily Hay Newman last night posted what I thought was a well-done explainer on this incident. It was titled, "Don't Freak Out About That Amazon Alexa Eavesdropping Situation." Hay quoted Amazon's detailed explanation, the one you just heard, and described it as, quote, "not completely implausible." She added, "It's like the Echo equivalent of a butt dial." I think it helps to understand this incident if you are familiar with Echo's messaging system, which Amazon introduced about a year ago. I'm going to demonstrate it to you by taking advantage of the fact that I have my Echo Show here on my desk registered to my mother's Amazon account. That's so I can drop in on specific rooms of their home in Cambridge. And we also have an Echo in the kitchen that's registered to my Amazon account. Alexa, send a message to Len Edgerly.
What's the message for Len Edgerly?
I am testing the messaging system to see if we can duplicate what might have happened to that family in Portland.
Sending from Lois.
Okay, so that was the message that I sent from my mother's account. And now when I go into the kitchen, there's a green ring around the Echo that we have in the kitchen that's on my account, so that means that there's a message, and we'll just hear what that message is. Alexa, what's my message?
Len, you have one message from Lois Edgerly.
I am testing the messaging system to see if we can duplicate what might have happened to that family in Portland. That's an example of how you can send an actual audio recording as a message to someone else in your address book. For anyone who doesn't realize that you can send actual recorded messages to anyone on your phone's address book, I think the fact that there was an audio file sent from the Portland family's home may seem very disconcerting in itself. What else is Alexa recording that maybe ends up in the wrong hands? But in the case of Alexa messaging, you have the ability to tell Alexa to record a snippet of audio so that you can send it to someone and they can listen to it. This is exactly the command that apparently got triggered in Portland, complete with attempts to verify the receiver of the message that the family says they never heard. The Wired story suggests that because the family said they have Alexa devices in every room of their home, the echo that captured snatches of the family's conversation could have been the one in the room with them, but devices in neighboring rooms could also have heard a faint and therefore skewed version of that conversation. That hypothesis makes sense to me based on my use of Alexa. Because I have a device registered to my mother in one room and one registered to myself in the next room, I have to get very close to the Echo Show speaker on my desk to give a command in a near whisper so that the echo in the other room doesn't hear it. If they both hear it, they both start talking because they can't use Echo's spatial perception to decide which one is closer to the command and therefore which one will be the single device to answer it. Alexa's far-field recognition capability has been one of the killer features for the device, making it possible to give commands across a big room and have them be heard. But in homes with more than one device, it can get a little complicated. The Portland family, I think, has found itself in the vortex of Alexa enthusiasts and haters. Before Amazon released the detailed account of the mishap, a family member identified only as Danielle expressed understandable outrage, saying she was going to return all of her Echo devices. I have not been able to find any updates of what she thinks today after the explanation. I actually will be surprised if someone who was so positive toward Echoes that they had one in every room would actually unplug from the convenience of Amazon's AI once the facts are known. Next in news is a story that indicates how powerfully time can change relationships between people as well as between companies. You probably remember that Hachette and Amazon faced off in an acrid and public dispute over a new contract 4 years ago. This week, Publishers Weekly reported the two companies are partnering on creating content for Alexa and the Echo Dot Kids edition. That's a children's version of the device. The project is named Classroom 13 Skill, and it is a new choose-your-own-adventure story created specifically for Alexa and Echo. The story is based on a popular children's chapter book series by Honest Lee and Matthew Gilbert. A Hachette executive, in praising the new content, said terms of the agreement are confidential. The associate publisher of Little Brown for Young Readers, that's an imprint of Hachette, offered this comment. As technology changes the way our children discover new stories, Hachette Book Group is committed to producing innovative content to meet kids on these emerging devices. And so Alexa does make odd bedfellows. I'm glad to hear it. By now, Amazon and Hachette, along with the other big five publishers, have, I suspect, renewed the contracts that sparked such public conflict the last time around. In this case, I think no news is good news because it means the professional negotiators on both sides managed to reach agreement without trading attacks via the New York Times. Finally, in news, I will have a link to a thoughtful piece in Quartz titled, Are eBooks Dying or Thriving? The answer is yes. That's reported by Thu-Huong Ha. The article takes a look at the state of book publishing, noting the decline in ebook sales by traditional publishers, while self-publishing continues to offer massive ebook audiences to self-published authors. If there's a moral to this story, it seems to be that the industry lacks good data on book channels and that it's Amazon's fault for not releasing more sales numbers. Author Earnings does a good job making reasonable estimates of self-publishing sales, and their data is quoted in the article. But with competing views of the numbers, everyone is free to believe their own narrative. That's a point that Jane Friedman made. What struck me most about this story, actually, is how little interest I had in spending a lot of time with it. 10 years ago, when I began this podcast, I was full of expectation that ebooks would take over the world, and it was great fun to chronicle the march toward that. The takeover has yet to occur, but the place of ebooks is secure as an option for readers, especially in genre fiction. I'm actually more interested these days in helping people get the most out of their digital reading, talking with authors, and trying to keep up with Amazon's relentless pace of innovation in gadgets that read books and much more. For the tech tip, I want to share an email that I received from listener Richard Arvidsson, who wrote, I recently bought a Fire tablet for my house boss, meaning his wife, when I set it up for her two profiles show, mine and hers. First mine, then hers. She just wants her profile to show. She is using this to replace her old Kindle. Can this be done? Thanks, Len. Richard. Thanks for the question, Richard. I've done some investigation of profiles on the Fire tablet, and I'll have a link in the show notes to an Amazon explanation of that feature. That's at thekindlechronicles.com. This is a way that you can share your device with one adult or also with some children. When I looked at the profile that I have for Darlene on my Fire HD8, I could not find a way to eliminate my profile so that only hers was on the tablet. I didn't try this, I'll say, because I didn't want to have to redo it after doing the test. But I'm pretty sure that the easiest way to accomplish the change that Richard's looking for would be to simply deregister the Fire from your Amazon account, then re-register it with the boss's account. And if she doesn't have an Amazon account, it might be worth it for her to create one for this purpose. Once the Fire is registered to her username, you can either have your profile visible on it or not. I hope that's helpful. Time now for the interview. Andrew Updegrove earned his BA at Yale and his law degree at Cornell. He has been providing legal and strategic advice to high-tech companies since 1979. I heard about his work as a novelist from Don Haig, a Belmont Hill School classmate who urged me at our 50th reunion to contact Andy for an interview. It worked out, and on Wednesday, May 23rd, I connected with him by Skype between here in downtown Denver and his summer home on Vinyl Haven. That's a magical island in the Penobscot Bay off the coast of Maine. I began by asking Andrew Updegrove about his day job and how it led to his writing of 4 satirical cybersecurity thrillers.
Well, my day job is as a lawyer, and I'm a high-tech lawyer and have lots of clients that are involved with cybersecurity. So that provided the subject matter knowledge, even though I'm not technical. That's maybe a good thing because it helps me to write as a layman rather than a computer geek.
You make the point that even if a reader doesn't know the difference between a bit and a byte, what is the difference? And if somebody doesn't know, will they find your books too daunting?
Well, actually, it's pretty simple. A bit is just 1, 0, or 1 in the computer context, whereas a byte is a series of consecutive bits, usually zeros or ones, that are read together as a single unit. And yes, you won't run into the need to know bit or byte in the books.
You published your first book, The Alexandria Project, in 2010. Your cybersecurity protagonist, is it Frank Adversego? How do you pronounce his last name?
Adversego. It's basically a summary of his character traits. He's both something of an egotist as well as his own worst critic. And he's very harsh on himself, and hence Frank Adverse Ego. Oh,
that's pretty clever. I like that. Well, what is he up to in the Alexandria Project?
In that book, that's where we first encounter him. He's working as a sort of underemployed computer engineer in the Library of Congress. And in the course of the book, finally hits his stride as a professional. He's set up in a way that puts him on the spot where he has to either get to the bottom of the mystery or find himself in, he thinks, very deep waters with the CIA and the FBI.
And so what's the crime there?
Well, interestingly enough, the initial crime is the theft of computer files. And the concept initially is that someone is just trying to highlight how vulnerable we are to cybersecurity hacks. But in the course of the book, we later find out that there's a nuclear international crisis brewing, which he finds his way into.
Oh, my. And since then, have some of the events that you imagined and sort of put in a fictional basis actually come to pass?
Sure. Let's just say that in 2010, I assumed that in North Korea, the leader might find himself at odds with or between his kids, one of whom bumps the other one off or tries to, and then one of the sons manufactures a nuclear crisis. Sound a little familiar?
Yes, my goodness. Does that feel a little eerie when you've written a book and events catch up with it?
Well, yes and no. My second book was about hacking a presidential election, if you can imagine that.
Wow.
My wife wants me to quit writing books. She thinks I'm a little too prophetic. But what's interesting about it is that it just goes to show how vulnerable we are when a guy with a humanities degree can come up with credible computer hacks that could destroy the world that later get confirmed by computer experts as being completely possible. I often say that when it comes to technology, we're a little bit like a kid in a candy store. We want all the sweet stuff now and we'll worry about the cavities later. Yeah. Vendors just don't bother to try and make their products secure.
Now, that was the Lafayette campaign, the second book. When you were sketching that plot out, did it feel very unlikely? Or?
Oh, not at all. First of all, computer voting machines are hopelessly vulnerable to attack, and we've known that for years. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that the stakes are so high, and indeed, people have been toying with elections for years. So when you look at something like the Koch brothers putting $100 million into influencing an election which they later lost, or spending $50,000 on a computer hacker and know you're going to win the election, it sort of takes you to the conclusion that sooner or later someone's bound to do that if in fact they haven't already. It just makes too much sense.
Your last complete book, there's one that we'll talk about that you're putting up chapter by chapter, but the Turing Test, A Tale of Artificial Intelligence and Malevolence, that was published in July of last year. There's a lot of really good information about what AI is and how it works and the threats. Did you have kind of a mission to write a cautionary tale to alert the public of dangers in this technology that perhaps we need to know more about?
Well, all of them are intended to be cautionary tales because we really are getting in a situation where we're more vulnerable by the day. If we have time to talk about the third book, that's the one that genuinely scares me the most because I think it's inevitable that the third one will happen. And it's by far and away the scariest one.
What's the title of that one?
That one's called The Doodlebug War.
Right, and what's going on there? Let's sketch the plot.
Yeah, the good news about the AI one is that, yes, I think it's very concerning, but it'll take longer for us to get there.
Uh-huh.
The Doodlebug War focuses on the fact that over the last 6 or 7 years, everything has been moving into the cloud, which for non-technical readers means that it's no longer on your laptop, it's no longer in a server in your employer's computer room. It's actually somewhere, maybe along the Columbia River, in a data farm a mile square. And why is it there? It's there because it's near Portland and Seattle, and it's near some of the cheapest electricity in the country. So today, everything is in the cloud. Your pictures, your university's information, all of the government data, all of Intel's computer chip designs, everything that runs the power grid, everything, the financial system, it's all there. And these data farms, as I said, are now enormous. And they're in a limited number of locations. And they're all near the coast because that's where the people are. And they're only defended lightly against maybe a truck bomb. You might think of it as being vulnerability by design. Because as you might recall, there was a time when we had this interesting hobby. It was called war. That was it, war. So here we have everything we need to survive in these data farms. And just to paint a very real scenario, we look at, for example, Tomahawk missiles, cruise missiles, which Russia now has nuclear tipped. The situation is the same in Europe. Everything is in data farms, all of which are within range of Russian cruise missiles. Let's say that one day Russia decides to set that off, and let's say it's in January. There's no fuel, there's no electricity, there's no transportation, there's no way to deliver food. Within a month, most of the people in the U.S. and Europe would die.
Wow.
It's there. I mean, it's. I won't tell you the plot in the Doodlebug War, but just to emphasize it, in that case, the villain is a Islamic extremists that I call the Caliphate, and they use 75-year-old technology just to sort of underline how easy it would be to do. And there are a number of countries and enemies that could do it tomorrow. That is scary.
I was, in my completely layman's perception of the way the cloud works, I was always had the idea that, yes, they're all by the Columbia River, but there's a duplicate in Singapore, and there's all kinds of redundancy in these physical places where the data resides. But you're making it sound like that's maybe not something to give much comfort.
Well, not really, because among other things, because it's being mirrored in real time, there no longer are any backups. There are just two instances at the same time. So there is no, vault somewhere with the backups anymore, because it's so reliable and it's backed in real time, so it can fail over from one to the other, that if you take them down, there is no backup. And since due to latency, you want to have your backup copy relatively near the user, because otherwise you'd have to wait, 10 seconds to have the signal go to Singapore and back, and no one would tolerate that. So unfortunately, this is why I say vulnerability by design. What should really happen is that all these data farms should be 30 feet underground. But that would be expensive, so of course we're not doing that.
Yeah. Well, let's turn to AI, which is the subject of the Turing test. You mentioned in there that AI, human-level AI, has been perceived as being 20 years away for the last 60 years. Right. Is that still the conventional wisdom estimate of how far away it is before this kind of capability that you talk in the book about might actually be real?
Yes and no, because we have to distinguish between two kinds of AI. There's what's referred to as general AI and specialized AI. Specialized AI, like a self-driving car or Alexa, is around us everywhere now. There are many, many, many instances of AI that is highly proficient but narrowly focused. The concept of general AI, where a single computer could do what they could do in the Turing test, that's somewhere down the line. We don't know how long it'll be. Some people think it's as near as a couple of years. Some people think it's 75 years. One of the scary things about it, and one of the things that I picked up on in the book, is that one concern that experts are worried about is what they refer to as a breakthrough, where the AI gets smart enough that it can start to teach itself. And then all of a sudden, the speed with which it advances towards general intelligence could skyrocket. So that's the scenario. Some people think it's possible, some don't. But that's the scenario where all of a sudden we might arrive there suddenly and unexpectedly, and in some cases might not even know that we were there.
How much does Alexa concern you?
Alexa's pretty primitive. I think that it's very concerning from a cybersecurity point of view, because people have already learned how to spoof Alexa. Just a few days ago, they came up with the equivalent of a dog whistle type command that you couldn't hear, but that Alexa could, that someone could turn it on and off. So all of this technology that's around us, it's now in TVs, it'll be ubiquitous like everything else. It gets rolled out before we've learned how to control it or protect ourselves from it.
I've read something that made me think that the listening ability of Alexa is not as scary as it might seem, and that there's an analog piece that has to do with Alexa waiting for the wake word, and that you couldn't just send a software hack over the internet and turn on the listening, that there's something hardwired there that protects it from an internet-sourced hack. Is that a correct way to understand the technology? Well,
it might be what Amazon would want you to think, but there's probably never been a computer program that hasn't had a vulnerability. If you look at any of the popular software that we use, it's regularly hacked. And this is from companies, look at something like Word or any of the Microsoft products that have been out there for decades. New hacks are still coming up with them, and they've got thousands of people focused on making them secure. So to say that Alexa is somehow invulnerable, I think is foolishness.
My wife and I recently took delivery of a Tesla Model 3 with the autopilot controls. how good are you feeling about the prospect of self-driving cars at this point?
Well, yes and no. I think that self-driving cars would be an enormous boon, not only for the safety of the driver, but you think from the standpoint of traffic control, you could have cars traveling 10 feet apart, and when you have 40 of them in line at a stoplight, they could all start instantly at the same time, if in fact you needed the stoplight at all, rather than taking turns, interweaving. So the promises are fantastic. Already, I think that the achievements are really startlingly good. I don't know how difficult or how long it will take to get that last bit where it's totally, where it's demonstrably safer than people. I think we will get there, but I think it's telling that it's gone so far so fast to show the degree of progress we've made in a short period of time, which has become possible through a conjunction of things such as the economic opportunity and companies such as Amazon that aren't performing to quarterly investor estimates. They're willing to make long-term investments. And the same thing also with quote-unquote unicorn stocks that stay public for 10 or 15 years and can take in $5 or $6 billion in investment without having to worry about quarterly earnings reports. So we have an alignment of market forces that permits these investments to be made to make these astonishing strides. I would caution, though, that the same problem arises here. To think that your self-driving car or your piloted car can't be hacked is nonsense. And that, to me, scares me more than this state of AI. I think we'll get there with AI being safe. I'm not so sure we'll get there with AI that won't be hacked.
The book that you're releasing, a free chapter a week, The Blockchain Affair. I was at South by Southwest this year, and, blockchain was all the buzz, and there was a lot of really interesting, it just seemed like every industry, healthcare, cars, there was a guy from Toyota, they're all sort of grappling with what does blockchain mean. And I wondered, out of all the different industries that you could have set this story at, why did you choose banking?
Well, for a few reasons. First of all, I was trying to come up with a plot that people could relate to. And stealing money, is an easy one. If anyone knows anything about blockchain, they know about Bitcoin. So the idea of having a plot that involved cryptocurrencies was something that made sense. There's some factual stuff out there about the history of Bitcoin that you can bring in a way that's easy for people to understand. So that was the main reason, that it was it made sense from a layperson's view to come up with a techno thriller. It was probably the most relatable and dramatic instance that I could think of. I did think about other ones, but this is the one that won.
When you're at a party and somebody asks you what blockchain is, and they clearly majored in English somewhere, right, have you figured out the best way to open someone's eyes as to what this technology is and what its significance is?
Yes and no. Yes is describing what it is actually pretty easy conceptually. I think the harder thing to explain is why so many people are so euphoric over it. So let's do the easy one first. What is it? Well, instead of having one bank with all of your bank records, you have as many banks as want to have one copy of the same records. That's really all it is. It's quote unquote a distributed ledger where when a transaction is recorded in one set of records, it propagates throughout all of the different collections of records. And that's all it is. So, that's the easy part. The hard part is, why are so many people so gaga over something which is really very basic? And with all the reading and all the research I've done into it, I still don't honestly get it. And part of it is because people are coming up with thousands of different ways of using a blockchain and ignoring the fact that in many of these, just because you can doesn't mean you should. In some cases, I think it would be utter nonsense to use a blockchain. The ways you're doing things now make perfect sense. In other ways, there's clear advantages. So I think it's another example of a high-tech bubble where everyone piles in, many of them cynically, in order to try and make as much money as they can while they can, and where a lot of people are going to get caught holding the bag when the whole thing crashes. At the end of that, what will come out of that is what comes out of most tech bubbles, which is some solid uses, many of which are more boring than the ones that are getting a lot of the press. So it's real. It's just that it's being expanded beyond what makes sense.
Yeah, overhyped, kind of the way the internet was overhyped when if you put .com at the end of any noun, you could raise all kinds of money, and
right.
Most of that money got lost.
And what we'll have to wait and see is that over time, the internet was as big or bigger than we thought it was back in 1999. But it took 10 years, to get to the point where things could start to fall into place. Amazon didn't become Amazon overnight.
Given that, have you dabbled with buying any Bitcoin or Ether or any of the other cryptocurrencies?
No, I haven't. I'm not a speculator or an investor. I'm one of those people who wants to put it somewhere and forget about it. But if you wanted to speculate and you didn't allow yourself to get taken in by the hype, it'd be a great thing to speculate with because it goes up and down. Yeah. Set yourself a set of arbitrary rules and then don't get carried away. Stick by your rules. And I understand it completely as speculation. I don't think it is a wise choice for an investment. And there's a difference.
Given how familiar you are in your work as an attorney with just the threats of cybersecurity, are your computers secured in an unusual way, or passwords, or what kind of understandable methods do you use to protect your own computing, given what you know about the threats?
Right. Well, I have the luxury, of working through my office system. So I do have my local laptop, but most of my work is done via, a remote program on our office servers, which are heavily protected in multiple different ways. With my own laptop, it's pretty well good hygiene and, not doing stupid things.
You had to take your Post-it off the camera to talk to me today.
Right.
Do you have one there just so that your laptop can't be watching you with nefarious intent?
Partly privacy and partly for that reason. That's right. Yeah. As a matter of fact, in the Alexandria project, that's one of the things that happens to Frank. Someone has actually hijacked his camera.
Oh, boy. Well, and that's a pretty affordable level of security to just put something over that eye.
That's right.
Let's turn to your publishing history. When you wrote the Alexandria project, did that was 2010, that was after the Kindle, did you go straight to Kindle Direct Publishing there, or what was the way that you got that book out to readers?
Well, two quick comments, especially for people who are just getting started in self-publishing. First of all, back then, there wasn't nearly as much information. And I actually used a service, to do the setup and whatnot. And then they were, quote unquote, the publisher. It didn't take me long to learn, though, that it was getting easier and easier to self-publish yourself. And that if it were easier to get good information, no one should consider anything other than, doing it directly rather than using one of the services that charge you $1,000 or something, because it's so easy today. It's so important to have control over your own books, so that you can engage in marketing and discounting and that sort of thing. So I would encourage anyone to go straight to that alternative and just make sure that they get good information to rely on.
And that's how you published, starting with the second book. You were doing it yourself all the way?
Yes, I did use somebody else to set up the files, just because there's some good and to design the covers. That's the other thing I would strongly, if you were going to pay for one thing, pay for a professional to do your cover. It's probably the single most important self-publishing decision you can make, because it's hard to sell against a bad cover, and it'll be holding you back no matter how good your book is.
Your books are available, I think, in paperback. Is that through CreateSpace, if somebody wants to get it on paper as opposed to Kindle?
Both CreateSpace and through Ingram Spark. A lot of the prevailing wisdom is that you want to put your book out on both. It costs you $40 a pop to load a file to Ingram, and libraries, among other types of purchasers and bookstores, are much more likely to order it through there than they would through Amazon.
Any idea what the breakdown is overall of your readers, Kindle versus paper?
Oh, it's 99% Kindle. That has something to do with how I market them. The other thing that I'd mention to your readers is that there is so much nonsense about marketing out there. It took me a long time to find that the best way, for me at least, to advertise is by doing discount and free sales through newsletters. And it took me longer to find the 4 or 5 out of the 100 and more out there that are actually worth using. And you can break even or better using 4 or 5 services and spend about a half an hour a month on your marketing. If you wanted to, make sure you have the best descriptions, the best books, the best covers, and then if you wanted to, you could spend half an hour a month on marketing and sell 5,000 or 10,000 books a year if you have 3 or 4 books to work with.
Well, that's a good ratio. The rest of the time you can spend reading and writing, and then doing your day job if you have one.
Exactly, which I do.
When do you think you'll have the blockchain affair finished, and you'll go through the chapter by chapter distribution, and then you'll finalize it in a form that then goes up as a standalone book? Right,
and I should mention for people that might have thought of this, one advantage to doing the posting of the chapters, not only does it give you a deadline, but it also allows you to get real-time feedback from your fans. And some of those suggestions can be really helpful. So I'm hoping by the end of the summer the final book will be available.
And do you know what's ahead after that in terms of your next adventure for Frank?
No, for a change, I don't have the next end-of-the-world scenario in mind, but I'm sure it's out there waiting for me.
Well, with your history of being able to predict the future, I think you should write a book about everything turning out wonderful and technology being safe and secure and making us happier and wiser. Then it might just happen.
My wife would like that.
I have been speaking with Andrew Updegrove, author of the Frank Adversego Thrillers series. Thanks very much, Andy.
Thank you. Take care.
In content, I will have links to 3 books that Andy Updegrove recommended for any of you interested in pursuing the subject of artificial intelligence further. They are Superintelligence, Paths, Dangers, Strategies, first edition by Nick Bostrom, Thinking Machines, The Quest for Artificial Intelligence and Where It's Taking Us Next, that's by Luke Dormehi, and The Quest for Artificial Intelligence, first edition by Nils J. Nilsson. Also in content, I will have links in the show notes to other podcasts that have featured interviews in the past couple of weeks with James and Deborah Fallows, who were on the Kindle Chronicles 2 weeks ago at the start of their book tour for their powerful new book, Our Towns, a 100,000-mile journey into the heart of America. I've not had a chance to listen to all of these interviews yet, but I've thoroughly enjoyed the ones that I have heard, especially a very fresh and personal conversation with Max Linsky of the Long-Form podcast. Max is, as opposed to talking to someone who's basically a contemporary of the Fallows, talking to Max, they were talking to someone younger than their sons, and some interesting interplay between the generations occurred that made that quite a poignant and touching interview, as well as one that contained lots of information about the topic of the book. Others who have interviewed the couple include Ezra Klein, John Dickerson, and Chuck Todd. I'm finding that this is a rare opportunity for me to do some learning about interview techniques, having done an interview myself and prepared for it very carefully and listened to how it turned out, to be able to compare how other people take on the exact same assignment, interviewing 2 authors on the occasion of their new book coming out. I think if I have a chance to listen to it carefully and take some notes, I may find some techniques that others are using in interviews that I might want to adopt myself as a way to improve my art. I'm always trying to find ways to hone this intriguing activity that I've set up for myself of spending 20 to 30 minutes each week talking to someone about something that I find of interest, and they do too. But I don't think I've ever interviewed somebody who so immediately had interviews available with so many other people coming at them from different perspectives, and this is going to be a good project for me in the coming weeks. One thing which I think you'll hear if you listen to the long-form podcast with Max Linsky is that the Fallows' just end up talking about their marriage and their life together as much as the topic of the book. I'm not the only interviewer that was drawn to that. Part of it's the idea that they were flying around in this small plane together, kind of a romantic setting. But there was some really informative aspects of the way they adjusted each of their careers to take into account the other and their ways of working with each other. One thing which came out in this interview, which I didn't know, I always knew that Jim had an interest in flying, but apparently when they got married, he expressed the desire to become a pilot, and she said, well, that's fine, but you have to wait until our children are grown. At that point, there weren't any children to grow up yet, but that was laid down as a pretty firm contract to their union, and he said that when the youngest of their boys got accepted to college, that day he went to the local airfield and signed up for pilot lessons. So he'd had quite a wait for that dream of his to take place, and he played by the commitment that he made to Deb from the start. Over and over there were revealing aspects of a long-term successful marriage, and one that I saw the genesis of when they were dating at Harvard, and I just was fascinated by that aspect of the conversations that they're having with other people in addition to the one they had with me. Before I sign off, I want to thank Stephen Campbell, who has an excellent podcast, The Author Biz. He's been on the show before when we were down in Sanibel. And as the deadline approached, today was the day that the new law in Europe about privacy went into effect. That's the GDPR, which stands for the General Data Protection Regulation. I knew that this was coming. I didn't realize that I really needed to update my web page to reflect the new regulations. But Stephen has graciously offered to other authors, and he offered to me simply to be able to copy the new privacy protection policy that he set up, and there's also a cookies policy, so that I could get updated. And I did that last night, and he obviously put a lot of work into coming up with a good solid policy, and I made a change in the kind of the back end of the website as well. So thanks to Stephen for that. And if you've got interest in how to become a successful author yourself, self-publishing, Stephen does a terrific show, and his interviews, he's one of my models for interviews too, because the quality of his listening and the engagement that he has with his guests strike me as I like listening to them, whether or not I'm deeply interested in the topic that is on offer in any particular episode, just because I like the interplay between Stephen and his guests. So highly recommended, and thanks for helping me avoid any fines from the European Union. Next week's guest will be Nick Wingfield, whose excellent coverage of Amazon for the past 7 years has made the New York Times one of the best sources for coverage of the company. That's as opposed to my opinion of it before Nick took over the beat. And so I look forward to talking to him. This will probably be the last show this year that I record here in Denver, because on Sunday, Darlene and I and the Yorkie Claire will be migrating eastward for the rest of the year. And this means that she's going to get her first chance to drive the new Model 3 Tesla. I'm going to get a chance to teach her what I know about driving it at this point, and we're both pretty excited about that. I have been watching the battery decline in its charge. As I described in my The Edge of the Road.com podcast, the breaker got tripped after a few days of charging from the 110-volt outlet in my parents' garage. So for the past 8 days, it hasn't been getting any charge at all. And in that time, it's been dropping a few miles of range each day. And I go to the app and I can see how many miles of charge are left. There's still plenty. I'm not going to have any difficulty driving it from my parents' house to our house and then getting to a charger. It's showing 189 miles of charge left. I also got a notice that there was a software update, and I don't know if it's able to do that software update if I'm not actually there to say do it at 1 a.m. or whatever. Music for my podcast is from an original Thelonious Monk composition named Well You Needn't. This version is Ramonk by Eval Monagat on the Variations in Time, a Jazz Perspective CD by Public Transit Recording. This is Len Edgerly for the Kindle Chronicles from downtown Denver. I really appreciate your taking time to listen to my show, and I hope you'll check out theedgeoftheroad.com. It's also at iTunes if you'd like to follow along on our Tesla adventures. I'll be trying to do that. I don't have a fixed time to upload that show, but it's been running once or twice a week, and it's probably going to be a lot more once we get out there, and maybe we'll have an episode where you get to see how well things go when I'm teaching Darlene the basics of driving the car.